everyone. For the first half of this week, we are going to be thinking about rhetorical fallacies. So just as the language of rhetorical appeal helps us evaluate what an author does well, the language of rhetorical fallacies helps us express what an author does poorly or unfairly when building an argument. In this lecture, I'm going to give a very brief overview of what rhetorical fallacies are and what some of them might look like. In your reading, you'll learn more about each rhetorical fallacy and see some examples of what they might look like in real life. And then in the discussion forum for this week, you will share some examples of fallacious appeals you find in the real world and discuss them with one another. Last week, we learned about ethos, logos, and pathos. These words described how someone positively appeals to their role as an author, the logic of their message, and the feelings of their audience. But just as knowledge of the rhetorical triangle can be used for good, it can also be used for ill. Rhetorical fallacies speak to how someone unfairly appeals to, misrepresents, or manipulates their credibility, the logic of their argument, or the feelings of their audience. I want to briefly walk you through the three classes of fallacies we will be thinking about in this class. Logical fallacies describe fallacies that use poor or unfair logic to argue their message. Emotional fallacies are fallacies that unfairly manipulate the feelings of the audience or use feelings to forego logic. Ethical and credibility fallacies are fallacies that maybe misrepresent or misuse the credibility of the author. I've chosen three specific fallacies to focus on in each three categories. The first category is logical fallacies, and here I've chosen to think about the slippery slope fallacy, a fallacy we call post hoc ergo propter hoc, and the straw man fallacy. So the slippery slope fallacy is a fallacy that assumes that basically assumes an unavoidable connection between something small and something related that's much bigger. So for example, slippery slope argument might look like an opponent to marijuana legalization arguing that legalizing marijuana will lead to the legalization of harder drugs. It's not saying that legalizing marijuana is wrong, it's simply saying that we can't do it because it would lead to something else that the author thinks would be wrong. Logically, it's not dealing with the issue at hand, and that's what makes it fallacious. Another logical fallacy is called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is Latin for after this, therefore because of this. This logical fallacy argues that because something happens after an event, it's caused by the event. I might say that because students did badly on a test the day after a full moon, the full moon affects test scores, totally ignoring the fact that the weekend before the test was homecoming. Finally, the straw man argument is one which purposefully misrepresents the opposite argument to make one's own argument look good and the other's argument look silly and obviously wrong. For example, say that I think that a group I'm a part of should use part of its budget to help a local food shelter, and someone else thinks that our budget is too tight and that we should ask individual members to contribute out of their own money. If I argue that the other person doesn't want to help the food bank and doesn't think it's a priority for a group to help people, I'm simplifying their point of view and leaving out some important details. I'm setting the other person up like a person made of straw so that they're easy to logically knock over. On this next slide, we have emotional fallacies. These are fallacies that unfairly manipulate the feelings of the audience or use feelings to ignore or distract from logical reasoning. Scare tactics are one of the emotional fallacies that people know and recognize best. Remember last week in the discussion forum where one of the commercials took place in a graveyard of people who died of heart disease because they skipped breakfast? Some people might say that that's unfairly appealing to people's fear of death in order to sell cereal bars. Sentimental appeals work similarly in that they appeal to people's sense of empathy or sensitivity in order to convince them of something. Have you ever seen one of those Sarah McLachlan SPCA commercials with pictures of animals who have been abused while McLachlan sings Arms of an Angel? The commercials don't share a ton of details about what SPCA is or how they'll use their money. They mostly just rely on people feeling sad for injured animals and moved by the music. Some people would argue that that's a sentimental fallacy. The last emotional fallacy on the slide is the bandwagon fallacy. This one appeals to people's desires to fit in. The bandwagon fallacy is the logic of everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't you? On the last slide, I have ethical and credibility fallacies. These are ones that misrepresent or misuse credibility. The first one is the ad hominem attack, which is Latin for against the person. In this one, instead of establishing your own credibility or addressing the true credibility of your opponent, you attack your opponent on personal and/or irrelevant issues. You might say that politicians' opinion on climate change shouldn't be listened to because of a recent scandal. You might discount someone's book because you hear that they're not a nice person. The next fallacy is called dogmatism. Dogmatism is a fallacy that argues a point of view is inherently right, that all other points of view are inherently wrong without sharing the logical reason why it's right or acknowledging that there are other points of view that need to be addressed. Someone arguing against a war might argue sending Americans to die in that war is wrong. It just is. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't, but without explaining why it is wrong or taking the time to listen to and respond to those who disagree, this isn't a very fair argument. They're setting up their own point of view as unquestionable, and that's a fallacious appeal to their own credibility. The last fallacy on the slide is the appeal to celebrity. This is when someone argues that because someone is famous, their point of view is worth listening to. A famous actor might think that we should stop using plastic, but unless she's backing up her point of view with actual environmental scientists, she's counting on her own unrelated celebrity to make a point for her. In the reading for this week, you'll see some more examples of each of these fallacies, but I hope this video was a helpful introduction. I'll look forward to seeing what you come up with in your responses to the homework and the discussion forum for this week. Thanks, everyone. Bye!